Still on kinds of obligations, this time joint and solidary obligations. So to start, okay, obligation according to the number of parties is classified as follows. An individual obligation, meaning there is only one debtor or one creditor. Or it may be a collective obligation, one where there are two or more debtors and two or more creditors. Dito papasok ang joint and solidary obligations. So for this type of obligations, itong joint and solidary, we are referring to a collective obligations where there are two or more debtors or two or more creditors or both. Joint obligation is one where the whole obligation is to be paid or fulfilled proportionately by the different debtors and or to be demanded proportionately by the different creditors. So take note of the word proportionately and proportionately by the debtor and proportionately by the creditor. So sa joint obligations, yung obligation ng debtors, is proportionately liable sila for their part. On the other side, yung creditor naman is proportionately entitled to the part to that part which they are entitled individually. So proportionate. Okay. Example: ABC borrowed 9,000 from D. So in this case, tatlo ang debtor is ang creditor. The presumption is that A, B, and C are jointly liable. They can demand only 3,000 from each of them. Simple, 9,000 divide 1, 2, 3 is ABC. So 3,000 sila, proportionate one. So that is a joint obligation. Si D can demand 3,000 from A, 3,000 from B, 3,000 from C. Okay, hindi siya pwede mag-demand kay A ng 9,000 or 6,000. 3,000 lang talaga. Yun lang ang part ni A. The same is true kay B and kay C. So D can only demand that portion which is entitled to demand from each of the debtor. So simple lang ng joint obligation class. Some words used for joint obligations. So take note of these words class. Kaya sa board exam, minsan ginagamit ito. If you encounter these words, ang meaning niyan class, joint ang obligation. Number 1, mancomunadamente, pro rata, proportionately. We promise to pay signed by two or more persons. Okay? Joint yan. Kasi minsan ang nakasulat ay, tapos tatlo sila ng pirma. Okay? So kapag the pronoun used is we, tapos signed by two or more persons, ibig sabihin jointly liable sila. So take note of this last, ibig sabihin ito, joint obligation. Number 6 then, use of and when enumerating parties. A, B, and C. And ang ginamit, ibig sabihin, joint. Kasi kung or, hindi na yung joint. Okay. So take note of these 6 terms, which means joint obligations. So general rule, a collective obligation is presumed to be joint. So kapag ka-silent ang problem, walang sinabing magkomunikada, magkomodamente, pro rata, proportionately, walang sinabi. Tapos maraming debtor, maraming creditor, ibig sabihin yan, presumed yan na joint. Exceptions. In which case, solidary ni sa class. When stipulated by the parties. Okay? So kapag ang obligation, walang stipulation kung joint ba or solidary, meaning yan joint. But if the parties agreed na solidary sila, then it is not joint. Number 2, when required by law. Pagka ang batas na nagsabi. When the nature of the obligation requires solidarity. So ito yung exception sa joint obligations. And when ordered by the court. So sa solidary obligation naman. When one where the entire compliance with the prestation is bound to be rendered by each of the debtors and or demanded by each of the creditors. So Take note class, entire compliance ang pinagsasabi dito. Entire compliance. So, kapag ka maraming debtors, the entire compliance can be demanded from only one of them, two of them, or all of them. So, anyone can be compelled to perform the entire obligation. Okay? Kanina kasi sa joint proportionate, this time entire compliance. Okay. Example, A, B, and C agreed to solidarily pay 9,000 to D. On this time, D can demand the entire amount from any of them. Pwede kay A lang, kay B lang, or kay C lang. Okay? Halimbawa, gidemand ni A, D kay A 9,000. Bayad si A ng 9,000. Then, he can ask B and C to pay their part. Okay. Ang importante dito kasi, the entire compliance is demanded by D from A alone. Pwede yun kasi solidary man. Bahala na si A, habulin si B and si C for their share. Pero ang compliance is entire. Take note lang sa ang focus diri is entire ang compliance. Dili pwede proportionate. Although later on, si A maghabol na kay B and C para proportionate sila share sa 9,000. Pero that is not compliance, pero paghahabol na lang yun ni A kay B and C. Okay? Basta ang entire compliance by the debtor to the creditor is entire. So, okay. Like solidary like sa joint obligation, meron ding terms used for solidary obligations. Kapag ka na-encounter nito, it means that the obligation is solidary. Number 1, pag sinabing jointly and severally. Do not be tricked by the word jointly. Pag nakita nyo ang word na jointly and or severally, ibig sabihin yan solidary. Kahit na nakasulat dyan jointly. Solidaria, in solidum, together and or separately, individually and or collectively, juntos o separadamente. I ang ginamit, I promise to pay, pero signed by 2 or more persons, solidary sila kasi I. Sinabi I, parang nag-iisa lang. Number 8 is the use of or when enumerating parties, solidary. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, pag nakita niyo ito, it means that the obligation is solidary. Kinds of solidarity, according to the parties bound, may be passive. So passive class, di ba? Si passive, si debtor ka na. Okay. Kapag ka ang solidarity is on the part of the debtor, is passive solidarity. Like our example, si A, B, and C may utang 9,000 kay D. Tapos solidarity, passive solidarity sa debtors. Active solidarity, solidary ang creditors. Okay. When one of them can demand the entire obligation. Because of the theory of mutual agency, one of the creditor is the agent of the other to ask from the debtor the compliance of the entire obligation. According to source, may be conventional if agreed by the parties. Conventional. Basta conventional ka, class convention. Agreement na class by the parties. Or stipulation. Legal solidarity, legal from law, imposed by law. Real solidarity is one where imposed by the nature of the obligation. Okay? The law does not expressly indicate the causes when the liability is solidary. Example, sa common carriers as decided by the Supreme Court. So, yung real solidarity class, wala talaga sinabi yung batas about yan. Depende na lang sa nature of the obligation. Like in the case of common carriers, common carriers class ka ng mga papasahero ng mga sakinan. Kapag an-aksidente sila, nakabunggo, solidarily liable yung may-ari, yung driver. Sabi ng Supreme Court. According to the legal type or become juris uniform when the parties are bound by the same stipulation. Non-uniform or varied when the parties are subject to the same stipulations like different periods or different conditions. Okay. So maybe ang si A, ibang deadline niya, si B, ibang deadline, si C, ibang deadline, solidary ang liability. So, katong debtor lang ang nag-deadline, nakato lang ang single. Pero entire. Ang tawag to, non-uniform solidarity. Solidarity is not presumed. So, dapat clearly agreed by the parties ang solidarity. Kasi kung hindi clear, it is considered joint. The reason is that solidary obligations are very burdensome, for they create unusual rights and liabilities. Okay, burdensome ang solidary obligation. So, some rules. The indivisibility of an obligation does not necessarily give rise to solidarity, nor does solidarity of itself imply indivisibility. So, pag sinabing solidarity class, solidary obligation, do not look at the thing. Kung ang thing ba pwede putol-putulon, i-divide. We are not looking at the thing here, we are looking at the compliance. Okay. Compliance of the obligation that must be entire. Okay. Hindi siya kahit na divisible yung thing, pagka solidary obligation, entire pa rin ang pag-deliver. So, do not look at the thing, kung divisible ba o indivisible. You look at the compliance, kung pwede ba entire compliance o hindi kapag ka nag-demand na si creditor. Solidarity may exist although the creditors and debtors may not be bound by the same manner in the same periods and condition. Tulad ng example ko. Si A binigyan ng deadline ng August, si B September, si C October. So sa August, ang pwede lang singilon for the entire obligation, si A lang. Not B and C because they are bound by different period. Pero entire pa rin ang pag-demand kay A, entire obligation. Bahala na si habulin si B and C sa September at saka sa October. A solidary creditor may do any act beneficial or useful to the others, of course, but he cannot perform any act prejudicial to them. If he performs such act, and the result is the obligation extinguished, he shall be responsible for the others for damages. So sa creditor side class, okay, pwede mag-perform og act ang creditor, ang isa sa creditor basta beneficial to all of them. Pero kapag prejudicial, and then nagkaroon ng nawala ang obligation, na-extinguish, then for yung creditor na nag-perform ng prejudicial act is responsible to the other creditors for damages. A solidary creditor cannot assign his rights without the consent of the others. That is self-explanatory. The debtor may pay any of the solidary creditors, but if any demand, judicial or extrajudicial has been made, the payment should be made to him. Ibig sabihin, class, the debtor kapag maraming creditors can pay the entire obligation to any one of them. Pero if may nag-demand na isa, doon siya mabayad sa nag-demand. Lalo na pagka judicial or sa court nag-demand. Judicial, sa court or extrajudicial, sa labas ng court lang, walang case, pwede rin yun. Okay? While the debtor can pay any of the creditors entirely, pero unahin niya, bayaran na lang yung mag-demand. Doon siya magbayad sa mag-demand. Doon niya bayaran ang entire obligation. Okay? The creditor may proceed against any of the solidary debtors. Of course, complete compliance man from any of them. Or some or all of them simultaneously. The demand must be against one of them, shall not be an obstacle to those being directed against the others, so long as the debt has not been fully collected. So, dahil entire compliance ang pinag-usapan dito, so therefore, the creditor may demand from anyone, all of them, or some of them simultaneously. Okay, entire compliance. Payment made by one of the solidary debtors extinguishes the obligation. Kasi entire, ibayaran niya lahat. If two or more solidary debtors offer to pay, the creditor may choose which one to accept. Siyempre, isa lang pwede niya piliin ng entire compliance. He who made the payment may claim from his co-debtors only the share which corresponds to each of them. Okay, so sa pag nabayaran na ang entire obligation, Maniningil na ngayon yung si nagbayad doon sa kanyang co-debtors for their share. When one of the Solidary debtors cannot, because of his insolvency, reimburse his share to the debtor paying the obligation, such share shall be borne by his co-debtors in proportion to each of them. Okay, kung halimbawa, binayaran ng isang debtor ang entire obligation, din ngayon, sinisigil niya ng ibang co-debtors niya, tapos yung isa cannot pay because insolvent na, then yung mga natira, paghati-hatian nila yung share ng insolvent. Payment by a solidary debtor shall not entitle him to reimbursement from his co-debtors if such payment was made after the obligation is prescribed or has become illegal. Okay, kung naging natural obligation na yung utang, binayaran pa rin ng isang debtor, hindi na siya pwede mag-demand sa others because kasalanan niya bakit na binayaran, i-prescribe na yung utang. The remission made by the creditor, remission kasi ibig sabihin, pinatawad na yung utang o di na sisingilin. Made by the creditor of the share which affects one of the solidary debtors does not release the latter from his responsibility towards his co-debtors in case the debt has been totally paid by any one of them before the remission was effected. Okay. So kapag binayaran na ng isa, tapos yung isa pinatawad ng creditor sa share niya, okay, dahil solidarity kasi ang pinag-usapan dito, i-share din yung portion ng pinatawad, i-share din nila yung deduction sa other debtors. So, fair para fair. Kasi fair yung responsibility nila total is complete, tapos yung benefit dapat i-share din sa lahat. The remission of the whole obligation obtained by the solidary debtors does not entitle him to be reimbursed by his creditors. Kapag yung isang debtor pinatawad ng ang buong obligation, hindi na siya pwede maningil sa iba. Kasi yung benefit, dapat i-share nilang lahat. Kasi entire yung remission, yung pag-forgive ng debt, entire na rin na wala silang babayaran sa isa't isa. If the thing has been lost due to the fortuitous event, or if the prestation has become impossible, without the fault of the solidarity, the obligation shall be extinguished. Of course, because of the fortuitous event, tapos walang fault. Extinguished na yung obligation. If there was fault, delay, or negligence, mora, culpa, dolo, of course, liable. All debtors shall be responsible to the creditor for the price and payment of the damages, interest, that prejudice to the action against the guilty or negligent debtor. So, kung isang debtor yun lang yung negligent or may dulo or culpa sa isa lang, okay, liable pa rin sila lahat sa creditor. Pero yung mga hindi guilty na mga debtor can file case for damages against doon sa guilty na debtor.